Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, FPL Vincenzo. We're obviously in the international break now between game week 3 and game week 4. So a little bit of a chance to do a different type of pod this week, looking at one of the sort of the bigger teams, shall we say. They're going to be on radar soon. So thought I'd do a pod looking at Arsenal. I threatened it in a few recent pods I've done that this would be a talking point soon. So they're an option in game week 4, obviously at home to Nottingham Forest. The fixtures directly after that aren't amazing, but fairly soon, I think it's from game week 7, that there's a nice little run for Arsenal. Any new signings they've made, particularly Gyökeres, you might have a bit more visibility and awareness how that's going to work with him. So I think they're kind of the team now they're going to be on radar. So anyone, if you're on wildcard, sort of around now, you'll probably look to roll a couple of weeks and then maybe look to move some Arsenal players in. If you're not on wildcard and you're rolling transfers through right now, I think Arsenal will still be the team you're targeting most. Probably say from game week 7. I think most managers will probably want some Arsenal. I don't think it's unreasonable to want 2 or 3. So we'll do a pod now looking at how they play, how their assets are looking to perform, what we've maybe learnt so far in the first 3 weeks, what's adapted since last year. And that might help all of us to then determine which players we want and how many Arsenal are kind of necessary from game week 4. So let's start with sort of their general style. And I think the first thing to note is here now they have a genuinely deep squad. Probably go as far to say they've probably got the best squad in the Premier League. They've genuinely got 2, I would say, good players in every position. So Raya and Kepa, obviously, as the 2 keepers. Got Calafiori and Lewis Skelly as the 2 left backs. Gabriel and Hincipi, 2 left-sided centre backs. Saliba and Mosquera, centre backs. Timber and White at right back. Zubamendi and Norgard as the 6s. The sort of physical 8s of Rice and Moreno, Odegaard and Onieri as sort of right half space 10s, Eze, Martinelli and even Trossard now off the left, Saka, Madueke off the right, and then Gyökeres and Havertz through the middle. They've even spoken about Gabriel Jesus in that, Max Dallman in that. So the squad is very deep. Lots of options for Mikel Arteta. Instantly, that makes you think, are Arsenal assets worth owning because of how much rotation is possible, which players within this system are nailed, and which ones are more likely to get rotated, get reduced minutes, etc. I think it's something really to seriously consider with Arsenal more than any other team, that if they've got good fixtures, you need your players on the pitch more so in those games. And who can we trust to play lots of minutes? So let's look at how they play, and then that might help us a little bit. So some notes I've written on the first slide here is around dynamics down the left. I think at the start of this year, Calafiori has obviously played all the games at left back, not Lewis Skelly. I think Lewis Skelly was sort of a midfielder within the Arsenal academy system, and is someone who's probably more at home in that position. A bit like what Zinchenko used to be when Arsenal first signed him. He can play at left back, and he's probably a better left back than Zinchenko because he's more physical. But we've seen from Arsenal, I think, a learning from Pep Guardiola, who's also adapted this at Man City, that there's something to be gained maybe by having basically 4 centre-backs and picking sort of centre-backs. And they've bought wisely here, centre-backs that are capable of doing full-back things, pushing up into other areas. And Calafiori is that guy, right? He was played centre-back in Italy. I think he's even played centre-back for the Italian national team. It was identified a bit like Gavardiol for Man City as someone that could do a job at left-back. We've seen Calafiori do quite well at coming inside to play as a sort of a second 6, also drive forward into left 8, left 10 positions, overlap the left winger, which may become more of a factor if Eze starts more over Martinelli, but we'll get to that. So he's, I would say, just probably a better athlete than Lewis Skelly. Lewis Skelly is probably better in central areas. If you want someone to go and do more of a job in the middle of midfield, that's fine. But I think Calafiori offers more physicality, is a better outright defender, and probably is more useful sort of overlapping down the outside and sort of making sort of those late runs into half spaces from deep. So I expect Calafiori to still remain first choice here, but we know he's a bit brittle in terms of injuries. how many games can he manage? Champions League hasn't started yet. So we will get rotation here. They've got Hinsipi as well, the new left centre-back, who maybe could be used at left-back as well. So there's arguably 3 people competing for this position. Zinchenko went to Forest, so that's one less person. But 3 people competing for this position. I think Calafiori is clear first choice, but no sort of by game week 7 that he's probably one of the more likely players here to be rotated, rested. So those that have been on him at the start of the year and done well out of him, fair play. I think he's one of those that could, for anyone that looks at the first 6 game weeks of trends, I think he'll, by game week 7, will look very good. Wouldn't be surprised if he's top on a few defensive metrics. And when you see good fixtures, that will naturally mean FPL managers will gravitate towards him. But I think he could become a bit of a frustrating asset in that period in terms of being rotated and rested more often than others. No comments on Gabriel and Saliba. We kind of know what we're going to get from them. Don't quite know how long Saliba's going to be out for after the early injury against Liverpool. Mosquera came on and did very well, I thought, but Saliba clearly still first choice. So those 2, say you pay a bit more than the fullbacks, but you know what you're going to get. Timber is more an outright defender than Ben White. I think Ben White offers more going forward, particularly on the overlap. I always argue that Timber's probably a bit better inside the game. Probably White's a bit better outside the game. So horses for courses. If you want your right back to do defensive things, narrower things, I think you pick Timber. If you've got a fixture where you can maybe give a bit more freedom to one extra defender getting into attacking positions, maybe look to play Saka a bit narrower, coming on that left foot and having that decoy overlapper, you pick Ben White. So there'll be, again, rotation and things around those 2. So again, a bit like Calafiori, I think Timber's probably a bit risky moving forward for a block of games because you might end up missing half of them. In midfield, I want to talk about these 2 as a pairing right now, Zubamendi and Rice, that it almost feels like in some ways Arsenal are setting a trap in midfield. I think these 2 are incredibly good at turning the ball over quickly. Rice, for his, becoming a bit more of a common phrase in football, is called ground eating. He's just so quick to cover ground. You wouldn't call him rapid. You wouldn't recognize him for his pure outright speed and pace. But he just covers ground, particularly over the first 3 to 5 yards, really quickly. So he's very good at sort of sneaking up behind people to win the ball back. Zubamendi, I think, is already top for interceptions or something amongst midfielders in the Prem. So I'm not saying Arsenal lose the ball high up the pitch on purpose, but it's almost in Arsenal's interest to give the ball away high up the pitch. The other team or the opponent then are now looking to break on Arsenal's opportunity with the what can we do? And then Arsenal then win the ball back themselves. And they've now got the opponent in a bit more of a unreliable defensive situation. So we say there's people that have made forward runs expecting to play on transition. The defence has mainly switched off momentarily from their defensive actions. So where Arsenal may have in the past had trouble for creativity, which I'll get onto in a second, it does help a bit with Eze, but in general, I think they've had trouble creatively breaking down deep blocks, lots of pressure on Saka in that regard. I wonder if Arsenal now will play in a way where they'll rely more on what we call the old Klopp Liverpool system of high turnovers. And with Zubamendi and Rice in the middle, if those 2 can turn the ball over quickly, you've got Odegaard, Saka and Eze in front who all can be creative players if used properly. That could be a lot of chances for Arsenal. This might be Arsenal's best defensive weapon actually here is the quick turnover, 1 or 2 passes. Can they get Gyökeres, Havertz running in behind? So this is probably the big change from Arsenal. I don't think Arsenal got this out of Thomas Partey. He wasn't the same sort of midfielder in that way to Zubamendi. And I think Zubamendi's a lot better at sort of proactive passing than Partey was. So they've now got a better passer in feeding the ball forward. They've got a better sort of defensively aware player, should we say, in Zubamendi. This could help the Arsenal dynamic through midfield this year to create chances quicker and more efficiently with better forward passes and more interceptions and turnovers. On to Eze. And I think this left side will become, I'll get onto it in a future slide, but this left side from Arsenal will become their main force. Rice is over that side, drifts around. Calafiori can play in or outside the game. Eze, I think, will start off the left, but he's not really a pure winger who wants to run at someone 1v1, get to the byline. I think his natural game will be to drift infield. Might mean Calafiori runs outside him a bit more often. For those that have had him from game week 1, they've obviously got quite a lot of points, and I think there's information on him later on his offensive numbers. That might start to slow down if he starts playing more with Eze rather than with Martinelli, because Martinelli was a bit happier hugging the touchline, staying wide. Calafiori could make runs inside him. I do wonder now if Eze is more likely to want to play inside, which means Calafiori has to make more runs outside him. Obviously, if he's outside him, he's spending less time in the box, probably less likely to get goals and assists. So bear that in mind. But I think Arsenal naturally play a lot down this left. Gyökeres has an instinct to drift over there. Rice is there. Calafiori high and advanced down that side more than Timber. Eze now or Martinelli over there as well. There is a slight preference, I think, from Arsenal to play down the left. They generally have more bodies down that side of the pitch in sort of closer proximity to each other, where down the right, Saka tends to be a bit more isolated. So Arsenal's left-sided players might be better because, I say, the ball naturally finds its way to there more often, and I say there's more rotations of players. Calafiori, Eze, Rice in particular, I think are all happy interchanging over there. And the more interchanging that happens, the harder it is to mark, because players like to mark an opponent rather than a space. And if they're marking opponents who could end up left wing, left back, or as a left 8, all in the same passage of play, that's quite hard to mark. The big area where Arsenal probably benefit from having Eze is in terms of ball carrying. I think it was noticeable in the Liverpool game in particular. Martinelli just struggled to really get a foothold in the game, even though he was in direct competition with Szoboszlai, who's not purely a right back. As soon as Eze came on, ball to feet, running at people, drifting inside, causing more sort of chaos and mayhem. And I don't think Arsenal have necessarily been particularly good for these ball-carrying players. Saka obviously does it down the right, but is often doubled or tripled up on. It's not really, Odegaard can do it, but I say he's more drops deep in the build-up to overload areas of the pitch. I wouldn't put him high on a list of ball carriers. Martinelli was more off the ball running, trying to run in behind. So having that player in the mould of like a Morgan Rogers or someone like that to get on the ball and really drive it forward, Semenyo, another example. I think Arsenal really benefit from that type of player. It was probably an absence from their squad, someone that could pick the ball up and carry it forward 30 yards at pace and get the team up the pitch quickly. I think Eze helps Arsenal massively with that. The other thing to point out is obviously David Raya tends to play more long ball than most goalkeepers. Good for Arsenal's defence because it's less likely they'll make mistakes in their own third, in their own half. And if the ball is lost or turned over, they've still got a defensive wall between the attacking team and Raya. So you'll see Raya play a lot of balls into Rice, who may play a little bit higher, or Moreno from goal kicks. Obviously, the striker, Gyökeres or Havertz, will be physical in that sense. If they can get the ball sort of to the feet of Eze from a long range pass, can then he start running with it? But I don't think you'll see too much from Raya in terms of short passes to the back four or trying to feed too many through balls directly into Zubimendi in central midfield. So other teams are more willing to take those risks, thinking that they can goad the press on them, play through it and attract more of the opponent up the pitch. But for Arsenal, I don't think we'll see too much of that. I'm not saying never, but Raya is certainly more willing than most keepers to go direct, which say is a big benefit to their defenders because the opponent has less ball in the Arsenal half, shall we say. If we then jump on to game by game, so Arsenal obviously had 3 fixtures so far. Manchester United away, which they won 1-0, comfortable 5-0 win against Leeds, and then the 1-0 loss to Liverpool. 1 goal conceded, which was a long-range free kick. So defensively, they've been very good. Note on these heat maps here, or player position maps, just where the positions people are taking up, you'll notice in all 3 games, number 2 is the deepest defender. So William Saliba tends to play as the last man. Probably could be good for DEFCON for him. We'll touch more on that on a future slide. But if he's the last man, that probably puts more pressure or more reliance on him to make clearances. And the DEFCON pod I did before the season started highlighted clearances as the main source of DEFCON points for defenders. So not saying that makes him a better pick than Gabriel, but I think in the past, in terms of BPS, both of those two were kind of similar, but Gabriel's superior goal threat made him a much better FPL own. Clearly, he still does have the superior goal threat, but if Saliba is picking up DEFCON more often than Gabriel, that might balance out against the extra attacking return. So I think Saliba becomes more pickable because of DEFCON. And I think a lot will hinge on game state with Arsenal. There's been a tendency in the past, maybe when they've taken a lead, to kind of protect that. And they've fallen into a deep block and relied on their defensive shape, their physicality to hold out and win a game 1-0. And obviously in games like that, you could argue that would boost Arsenal's chances of DEFCON. It's how Nottingham Forest played a lot of last year, spent a lot of time in a deep block, pressure on the ball, tried to hit teams on the transition. Arsenal could do more of this with Gyökeres and Eze. So I think I did a pod in pre-season looking at certain centre-backs and why maybe they weren't pickable. Saliba was included in that pod. My opinion's changed a little bit because since then, obviously, we found out that these DEFCON points exist. I'm not saying he'll get it loads. I'm not saying he'll get it as often as others. But in terms of the premium defences, we've seen Van Dijk pick it up in a couple of games. I think Saliba is probably as capable as Van Dijk of getting DEFCON points now. So if you can expect him to get DEFCON in 10, 12 games of the season, maybe a third of the fixtures, that's an extra 40 points or whatever that's going to be, 35, 40 points over the season. That's going to add up. So I do think Saliba's pickable now because of this. And I say that the data on the screen right now are the positional situations from Arsenal in the first 3 weeks suggests he's the deepest. Against Liverpool, obviously went off earlier. Mosquera came on. Mosquera was actually in a normal Saliba position, again, the deepest. So Gabriel, very much the front foot defender. The right side centre-back is going to be effectively the sweeper, if you want to call it that. Another one to draw your attention to is number 33. So that's obviously Calafiori. Home game against Leeds, he was higher, spent most of his time in the opposing half. But generally higher than Timber, generally playing in the opponent's half, at least the halfway line. So he's getting into quite good attacking positions. He's a very short-term pick. For those on free hit in game week 4, which I think I am, he's a genuine option. Still not guaranteed to start. Obviously, Lewis Skelly, we haven't seen start a league game yet. Let's see what happens over the internationals in terms of how many minutes people play, how they come back, what comments are made in the press conference. But he's, for a 1 week punt for a free hit, I think he's the best Arsenal defender. His position's the highest. He's got good data. He's generally involved and a bit more of a set piece threat than probably Saliba, Mosquera or Timber, probably second only to Gabriel. So his position's very good. You'll see as well, Noni Madueke. So he's number 20. Didn't start in the Man United game, then was played off the left in the Leeds game, ended up playing quite narrow and was actually Arsenal's most advanced player, even playing higher than Gyökeres as an average position. Then against Liverpool, he was Arsenal's highest player again, albeit this time down the right. I think Arsenal identified that matchup with Gyökeres as being a route to possibly break through. So with Saka out, he's another interesting one for a free hit. Again, you have to think he's second choice role behind Saka, but he does bring more pace than Saka and possibly even a little bit more directness, I would say. I think Saka's more willing to do the right thing, shall we say, sometimes, and play the way he's facing, come back inside, and maybe the opposing defences, I'll use the word loosely, respect Saka a bit more. So there's an expectation that defences will double or triple up on him, where Madueke maybe doesn't have that same... People don't have that same mindset towards him, maybe more willing to play 1v1 against him and try and focus on someone else to try and shut down. So for a couple of weeks until Saka comes back, he could be a nice differential, but he's playing very high. And then obviously Gyökeres, number 14, was quite advanced against Man United as the main sort of central point of the attack. Dropped a little bit, touch deeper maybe against Leeds to be more involved in link and build up. He was actually deeper than quite a lot of players in that game for Arsenal. And then Liverpool again was maybe a bit deeper. So he spends a lot of time nearer the halfway line because Arsenal play a lot of long ball from Raya. It's become sort of typical for that to be aimed at Kai Havertz. Obviously, Gyökeres is in that spot for the time being, and a bit of a change in mentality for him, where maybe in Portugal at Sporting, his main role was to run in behind, where for Arsenal, I think he will be asked to be a bit more involved in link play, build up, and sort of as a means to get Arsenal up the pitch a little bit more. So not that he can't run in behind. I'm sure we'll still see plenty of evidence of him running in behind and trying to sneak in behind the last man. But I think for Sporting, that was his only role, really. He didn't have to get too involved in the game. He was allowed to play on the shoulder, just look to be a threat in behind as often as possible. That skill set will help Arsenal. But they've at times been a bit short of those sort of players running in behind. But I think his game's going to have to be more varied at Arsenal. There's going to be more expectations for him to do more things. So just bear that in mind. I've done a few pods now, or a few slides now, I should say, looking at individual things. So we've got one here looking at defenders. So in terms of points so far, Calafiore's on 28, Timber 26, Saliba 16, Gabriel 14. So the two cheaper fullbacks comfortably outscoring the two more expensive centre-backs. So I think it's Calafiore that stands out here. 1.45 XGI so far through the first three fixtures is the most of any defender. And Timber at 1.01 is actually the second most. So the two Arsenal fullbacks, despite the fixtures not being incredibly good, they played Liverpool and but they're playing game week 1. My mind's gone blank. Man United in the first 2 weeks. They're still the most high upside defenders, higher than the likes of Munoz and Gyökeres and other players like that. Porro, who the expectation might have been more on those guys. So it's 7 goal attempts already for Calafiore, 5 on target, 2 chances created. Timber, 4 attempts, 4 on target, 3 chances created. So both of those two very advanced, likely to get in the box. I say the long-term problems for them is that there's a lot of competition for their roles. They're more likely to get rotated than others. The problem with these dynamic roles is there's so much ground these players have to cover in a game. They're obviously the fullbacks, but they have to get up and support attacks. They're constantly doing a lot of running, should we say. And that will take a strain. We've already seen quite a big collection of hamstring injuries and things like that already in the league. If you overuse these players and put too much demands on them in terms of sprints per game, ground coverage, etc., you heighten the risk massively of sort of injuries, particularly to hamstrings. So I do worry that these two can sustain this, and I think they're going to be rotation. So for free hit, if you want double Arsenal defence against Nottingham Forest in game week 4, I think there's a good chance both will carry on playing for now. But if you're looking to bring them in with your general transfers, or you're looking for an Arsenal defender on wildcard, I think it's a little bit risky. You're potentially walking into a problem quite soon, a bit like what happened with Rico Lewis last year for managers. Different price point, obviously, at 4.5, but people saw that and thought, yeah, I'll have him as a 4.5 defender. Quickly, week to week, you weren't sure if they were going to play or he was going to play. I think it'll be the same for these two Arsenal guys. Gabriel and Saliba, not much in terms of attacking threat so far, or chances created. Defcon, I say, is slightly intriguing. Saliba got 14 when you need 10 for the 2 points. He got 14 against Man United, just 5 in a home game with Leeds, and he's already on 3 in the Liverpool game before he got substituted quite early. So I do wonder here if Arsenal are going to dominate the ball at home, how likely Defcon will be. But certainly in these away games where Arsenal may be a bit more willing to protect a lead and maybe won't be so gung-ho and so on the front foot and are prepared to what we call suffer and sit in a deeper block for longer periods. So I wouldn't be surprised if Saliba got some Defcon. So he's on my radar for game week 7. I say naturally, I think people just instinctively, if they've played FPL a while, will think Gabriel's the better option. And he still might be. I'm not saying Saliba's definitely better. But how many attacking returns is Gabriel going to need if Saliba's getting Defcon every 2-3 weeks? Saliba may end up outscoring him if Gabriel goes for a little barren run of no goals or anything. Gabriel hasn't really been near Defcon yet. So, yeah, I think in some ways, Saliba might actually be a better pick than Gabriel once we've got full clarity on his injury situation. And I've just put on the thoughts at the bottom with Gyökeres. So I mentioned 5 minutes ago now, whatever it was, that he likes to run in behind. So if Arsenal are 1-0 up in a game, for example, as a hypothetical situation here, if they can sit in a deep block and win the ball back in their deep block, pass the ball forward quickly to a Saka or to an Eze, if they're positioned a little bit higher, even maybe an Odegaard, and in 1 or 2 passes, they've won the ball back in their deep block and released Gyökeres in behind. is probably the ideal game state for him, because he's in a bit of a tricky position. Gyökeres, he's obviously a big guy, physical, got good size about him, but he doesn't maybe play using that size as a strength. He's not like Chris Wood or Mateta, who uses their body well and sort of enjoys the physical in that way. He feels like he wants to play more like a Michael Owen, Jermaine Defoe type striker, even though he's built like the other type. So I'd say he will muck in, but he's not Kai Havertz in terms of competing for duels and winning the ball back and allowing Arsenal to sort of hold possession higher up the pitch. It was my concern at the start of the season, actually, that I thought Havertz would play more, because the way Arsenal play, particularly in terms of build-up and in terms of launching attacks from deep, Havertz is quite a focal point of that attack. Did Gyökeres have the skill set to do that? I'm still on the fence on that. But certainly Gyökeres' skill set helps on transition if he can play on the shoulder and just look to constantly try and run in behind, because the opponent will have to throw more bodies forward, play more on the front foot to try and sort of equalise if they're 1-0 down. If Arsenal just leave Gyökeres up front like Man City do Haaland, and that might be the role he has here. This might be sort of a slight transition where Arsenal move more to the Man City model of having, say, 4 centre-backs basically across the back line, and now just a centre forward that doesn't do loads of running, doesn't do as much pressing, isn't as involved in build-up, but is more of a threat, sort of running in behind and scoring goals if you can get him into those positions. Havertz wasn't really that striker. So could be a transition for Arsenal to be a bit more deadly and win tight games, having more of a clinical finisher, more of a dominant goal scorer in the team. And what's Gyökeres going to want here? Playing against deep blocks? Like, is he going to do well versus Nottingham Forest in game week 4, for example? Forest play quite a deep block. They've got Milenkovic and Murillo, are very physical defenders. Those two, I think, especially Milenkovic, I would expect to get the better of Gyökeres physically. If Forest are in a deep block, how much space is there for Gyökeres to run in behind? Not a lot. So you almost want him in matches against higher line defences. Someone like an Aston Villa could work quite well. Or you want him in a game state where Arsenal are winning. So there's more space on transition, more space in behind to counter-attack into. It feels like, for me, for Arsenal, it's a lot of money spent, but he'd be better off being an impact substitute. And football isn't viewed the same way as rugby in that way, but rugby have what they call finishers, players that don't ever start games, but they're known to come on for the last 30 minutes and do what's necessary within the game state. Say footballers, you have odd players in the past, like Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was known to be a bit of a super sub. But it might be a good strategy for Arsenal to play Havertz for 60 minutes to keep things, I'll use the word tight, make sure Arsenal win battles in the right areas, link up play in the right areas, give an option for David Raya in the right areas. If Arsenal can get a 1-0 lead in that period, all well and good. And then when defences are getting tired, maybe teams play slightly higher lines, try and dominate the ball a bit more, have to attack a bit more frequently with more bodies, then Gyökeres is there for the final 30 minutes to maximise those opportunities. Just a thought. But jury's still out on him. I'm not in my free hit for game week 4. I'll probably talk about this more next week, but he's one of the hardest players I'm thinking to put in. I think Arsenal will dominate the game against Forest. Lots of possession, lots of territory. And if Arsenal got a lot of the ball and they're spending a lot of the time in the Nottingham Forest half, owning the Arsenal striker is probably a good thing. But in terms of the actual matchup of the game, I'm not sure it will really suit Gyökeres. I say we're playing against deep block. He won't have a lot of space to work in. He'll be against sort of physical monsters in Milenkovic in particular. Doesn't feel like it should suit him, but we'll see. Oh, and I've got a whole sort of slide on him now individually. So in the first 3 weeks with him, interesting that both the away games so far he's had barely any impact. Not a shot in game week 1 or game week 3 against Man United or Liverpool. Expected assists 0.06, 0.16 respectively. Touches in line with the home game with Leeds. But the home game with Leeds, 1.28 XG, 3 goal attempts, 2 on target. He obviously scored a couple of goals. So just a little bit of a recap. He scored so many goals in Portugal because he was in the best team, and because quite often, for some reason, Portuguese opponents didn't always play in a deep block. They played in a mid block or even with a high line. And in terms of physicality, I don't think they were anything like a Van Dijk or a Konate or a Milenkovic or someone like that. So he could more often than not bully those opposing defenders in Portugal, and he had a lot of space in behind to run into. So once someone released him in behind, the opposing defender was not going to outmuscle him, was not going to knock him off the ball, might not even be able to catch him for pace. So he got quite a lot of opportunities from those situations. In the Premier League now, I think the way opponents press is a lot better. I don't think there's as many teams playing high lines, even mid block. I think most teams are quite happy to drop back into a bit of a deep block now and limit space in behind. And certainly the physicality of the Premier League defender is way higher. Most teams in the Prem, pardon me, have what you would say good physical defenders. The Brentfords, I say Liverpool to sort of Mountains. All big examples like Dan Burns, Finn Botman, people like that. So the league, I don't think is going to be easy for his skill set. The team he plays for, like he might have been better off at a team that play on transition, like a Nottingham Forest or maybe more like a Brighton or something. He could have done quite well maybe in a team like that. Maybe the way they play suit his skill set more than Arsenal. So I do worry that the matchups were really seem to suit him, how many of them he'll get in the Premier League. I say he could be one of those players that sort of comes to life in the second half of matches. From an FPL perspective, that's not ideal, sitting there for 60 minutes with a striker, particularly at his price point, is someone you might captain. And at 60 minutes, you've seen him have no shots, barely any involvement, looking like he's not going to do very much. But I am confident that come the end of the season, a lot of his goals may come late in games if he's still on the pitch at that point. Final point is, say, can he develop into a target man? Because not his game naturally, despite his size. Doesn't really want to get caught in the physical from a rare goal kick. He wants to be on the shoulder. Not going to work for Arsenal. Maybe could adapt a little bit and push Rice higher to be that target man from the goal kicks and things like that. But we've seen some adaptation from Arsenal. Are we going to see that the Gyokores is allowed to just basically hang around on the shoulder of the last defender for the whole game and just constantly make 15, 20 sprints in behind, hoping to receive the ball on 2 or 3 occasions? Maybe. And I say it will be a move more towards the way Man City play with Haaland to do that. Not sure we'll get that from Arsenal. So hopefully by game week 7, which is maybe the time we want to bring him in, I think a lot of managers at that point would game week 7, game week 8 might be considering Watkins to Gyökeres. We'll have a bit more evidence on how he's playing. But at the moment, the away data has been awful. The home data has been good. It's 3 game weeks. I don't think we can be clear so far that it's a home or away problem. It might just be matchup related, small sample size, but something to keep an eye on. Little takeaways here. I'll put the next batch of fixtures on the bottom that we have. Forest, obviously, now. Man City, Newcastle directly after them. Might not naturally be games you want them. Might be prepared to play a bit more higher line, though, Man City and Newcastle. So there might be space for Gyökeres in those sort of games that there might be a bit more opportunity to run in behind. He'll be against physical defenders, but there might be more space for him. But this run from game week 7, West Ham home, Fulham away, Palace at home, Burnley away, Sunderland away, Tottenham at home, looks rife for Arsenal players. What can we learn in the next 3 weeks? So just a few things to monitor. Eze, we haven't seen start yet. Sort of his main perks, shall we say, at Palace were his creativity and generally his shot volume. Wasn't afraid to have a shot from distance. I think Arsenal have suffered a bit in both of these areas in recent years. So I think it's an area that he can have the biggest impact on them, particularly in the creativity side. So a lot of pressure on Saka. Odegaard, I've said for a little bit of a time, his profile is more like a Bernardo Silva. And Man City don't use Bernardo Silva as a number 10. He's very press resistant. He's very shrewd on the pitch in terms of his position. He knows when to do certain things. He's very good at causing overloads and dropping into space. To often starts quite high and makes runs backwards because the opposing player against him doesn't want to sort of move into those areas. So he can create overloads there. He's fundamental to the way Arsenal press. He's the second presser with the striker. So I can see why they don't move in. But I do feel like Arsenal could get more end product out of someone else in that role. You've seen what Chelsea have got in the past out of Cole Palmer, what Man United have got in the past out of Bruno Fernandes. Players with these more profiles, more geared towards risk-taking, more geared towards goals and assists, Arsenal have maybe lacked. I don't think they're going to change Odegaard's position anytime soon. So maybe Eze off the left will offer more of this, maybe play a bit narrower, look to get himself into more shooting positions. I think he's one I've definitely got my eye on from game week 7. He's obviously priced as a Palace asset. Issues being, even at Palace, he didn't play 90 minutes very often. And at Arsenal, you can see him getting subbed off for Martinelli if he starts. I think he will be first choice on the left. But sort of split minutes with Martinelli, do you want to pay that much for him when you can have like Antoine Semenyo for a similar price playing 90 minutes every week for Bournemouth, or Morgan Rogers at a similar price playing 90 minutes for Villa? Is Eze going to give you enough in 65, 70 minutes for Arsenal compared to similar price players at other teams who will play 90 and are in equally attacking positions? Something to think about. But let's see how he does in terms of creativity and shot volume. But he's a valid punt, I think, from game week 7. And there's plenty of options to move off of him for if it's not working out. Mentioned it a few times, but see how Arsenal perform with the lead. Obviously, against Leeds, when they went 1-0 up, they carried on attacking, scored 5 goals. They may persist and be more like that at home. But away, if they get a lead, we haven't seen them score away from home yet. Would it be go into their defensive shell, rely on the physicality in defensive midfield to protect that? What impact does that have on them scoring 2 or 3 goals in the game, on the defenders for DEFCON, etc.? So it'd be nice for Arsenal, obviously not this week because they're at home, but to just get a bit more evidence in certain games. I'll be more interested in the Man City and Newcastle games if they manage to go 1-0 up in either of those games, how they play. Is it protect this, or is it attack for more? My philosophy has always been the best way to stop the other team from scoring is to have the ball. Man City have been quite this in the past, that with Rodri and players like that, even if they're 1-0 up, they still try and have 65, 70% possession and control the game with the ball. Where Arsenal have maybe sacrificed the ball and relied on their individuals and their shape to maintain that 1-0 lead. And the final takeaway is which attackers are given enough output to pick when the rotation is likely. So I mentioned at the start that every player really has someone competing for their position. I think Arsenal aren't likely to rotate Odegaard with Elneny as much as they are Eze with Martinelli or with Calafiori and Lewis Skelly. So some players will be more nailed for minutes. But even Saka now might be rotated more now they have an adequate understudy with Madueke. So, or could Eze, as an example, who's not playing off the left and Martinelli gets a game, could Eze play as a 10 in a certain game and Odegaard gets a rest that way? There's a few more sort of flexy positions now for Arsenal. And I think probably the biggest headache and dilemma with them is working out who's worth the risk. Is the output high enough for reduced minutes? If you're only going to get 180 minutes of someone in 3 weeks, that's fine if they're getting 3 attacking returns. But there'll be other players at similar price points getting 270 minutes. And not saying minutes is the be all and end all, but it feels like there's a reasonable amount of options in the game right now of FPL. So it makes it a bit more awkward to pick someone who seems like a minutes risk. Don't just stem to Arsenal like Cody Gakpo, I think is a good example of this high output, but is he a minutes risk? So these are the decisions that will probably have a big impact on where you finish the season. If you're prepared to risk more of these minutes risk players and it goes well for you, you'll fly, because a lot of managers will be a bit more cautious, a bit more reserved, and be thinking, I don't really want that battle week to week. That will he start? Won't he start? Will he come off at 59 minutes, etc., etc. So let's have a look over the next couple of weeks. Who's getting good underlying data? Who's taking shots? Who's getting in advanced positions? Who's putting themselves positions for returns, and if they're getting good minutes as well, that's a bonus. But the fixtures are coming up for Arsenal, so they are a team that you if you're not considering, I think you want to from game week 7. A really nice run of 6 there between 7 and 12, and then maybe you move off them at that point to a Man City or a Liverpool whose fixtures get better from game week 13. So probably 3 weeks of learning here, I think, on Arsenal, but they should probably be the team that are sort of most at the front of your mind heading into sort of game week 7, game week 8, that I need to buy some players from this team if you're rolling transfers through. That's it for this one. Gone on far too long again. Get carried away sometimes on these. We'll have a pod out next week as well. I don't know exactly what the topic will be. I am on free hit in game week 4. So I could talk about that in a bit more detail if there's a demand for that. Go through sort of all my thoughts around sort of players I'm considering. I'm far from settled on a free hit team. I've probably got a short list of about 30 players who could make the draft. So I might go through it position by position and what I'm thinking. It might help with general transfers as well, wild card decisions if you're that way inclined in going into game week 4. But yeah, other than that, I'll speak to you all soon. Thanks for listening. Until the next one. I'ma do this.